Next, once you have a very good understanding of your users and their needs and goals, you can start thinking of what solution you're offering to actually meet those needs. I'd like to think about this in 2 steps. First, you need to establish what solution space you work with. You can think of this as defining your market. You'd be surprised about how much you can stretch your imagination there. Second, once you have defined the solution space, it is time to think through how your product is positioned in that space. So let's start with defining the solution space. The first consideration is that users and people in general are very averse to change. Because in many cases, you're very comfortable with the products that you're already using, and there's always a lot of cost to switch products. So it's extremely important to think of what benefits you can provide with your product that can lead to change. Hopefully, with the exercise of trying to figure out the users' needs and their goals, you already learned of what they're currently doing to achieve those needs and goals. And so what is the next best alternative? If your product didn't exist, how would they achieve the same outcome? And then the second question you have to answer is, how much better can you make that experience? Think about this with 10x. Is your solution really 10x better than what they're currently doing? This can be in many different areas and measured in many different ways. It can be 10x cheaper, it can be 10x faster, it can be 10x better in terms of quality, but the main message here is it really needs to be significantly better for users to actually make a change on a large scale. A very common story that people tell is about the Dvorak keyboard. I'll give you a very short version of this story. So you may be aware today's common computer keyboard layout is called QWERTY. That's just the first 6 letters on the keyboard. And if you're in Central Europe, the last letter is a Z instead of a Y. The story of how that came to be is actually from mechanical typewriters. When mechanical typewriters came out, they tried to find a layout that would reduce the occurrence of jams when 2 letters are used that are very close to each other in the typewriter. That's because characters were mounted on metal arms or type bars, and if you hit 2 characters that were close to each other, those bars would get jammed. So they came up with a layout where, based on the typical words that people write, it would reduce the chances of jams. So it was designed really based on physical limitations of the machines back then. When they introduced electrical typewriters and computers, those limitations didn't really exist anymore. So the Dvorak keyboard is actually a better keyboard if you think about optimizing for speed. This layout, as you can see, is very different from the ones that we're used to. It is actually proven to be much faster than the QWERTY layout. But it was never adopted by the masses because the perceived cost of learning a new layout and the actual cost of replacing all of your devices was too large for the benefit. This is a very good example of not providing enough value to actually accommodate for the cost of switching to a new product, and a failed product that is theoretically superior to its existing alternative. The next important question is what you're actually competing with. So when you think about your product and the needs that you're meeting for your users, in many cases, the alternatives of products may not be very obvious. So let me give you a couple of examples. Let's take another look at Fitbit. At one point, the CEO of Fitbit said that they're not really competing with the Apple Watch. He meant this because it's a different product with a different price point, and it may address different users and different users' needs. However, I would argue that in this case, that Fitbit is actually competing with the Apple Watch and also Rolex in at least 2 dimensions. So the first one is it tells time, and there's a lot of different products that tell time these days. The second and the most important one is real estate. And what I mean by this is the real estate on your wrist, because if you think of it, all of these products are competing for real estate on your wrist. And I personally haven't seen many people who wear multiple watches or even 2 watches on 2 of their wrists at the same time. So if you really think of it, Fitbit is competing with Rolex and any other expensive wristwatch because people are not very likely to actually wear both of them all day. So you really have to expand the way you think of who your competitors are and what may keep people from using your product. With regard to telling time, everyone is carrying a phone which tells time just fine, and they look at it all the time anyway. Phones are also starting to compete with Fitbit on another dimension, because these days they also count your steps, and a lot of phone manufacturers and software developers provide apps on these mobile phones that also give you some of the fitness tracking capabilities. So now if you're the product lead for Fitbit, you not only have to think about competing for wrist time, but you also have to think about competing with other devices that people carry with them that tell the time and count steps. A final example of competitive thinking is the jobs to be done theory of innovation. Clayton Christensen published a book about this, which I highly recommend. The very short version of the motivating story involves milkshakes. When fast food chains are trying to increase their milkshake sales, they did all kinds of A/B testing of different recipes. However, if they found recipes that tested better in the lab, they didn't result in increased sales. So first, they observed. They camped outside a fast food restaurant and observed what kind of people buy milkshakes and when. It turned out that most bought milkshakes early in the morning and then drove off in their cars. Then they expanded their study and asked people what job they hired the milkshake for. This is just a different way of saying, what need are you meeting with this product? This is another example of thinking broadly about what need a product is filling, as opposed to focusing only on the product itself. It turned out that the need that they were filling was that of boredom, because they had a long drive ahead, and staying full until lunch. And the competitors were not other milkshakes, but they were bananas, donuts, bagels, and other products. So now that we know the solution space, it's time to think about how our product is positioned in that space. There are a couple of dimensions of products that are extremely important to think through when you're trying to find out whether these products actually meet your users' needs. The first dimension is whether your product is focused. Google actually has some interesting history here. When Google first tried to get into the media and TV space, we launched Google TV, and was a very complicated product. It had this very complicated remote, and there were a lot of partnership deals involved to actually make sure that there was a lot of content on Google TV. If you've never heard of this product, or if you've never used it, there's a reason. It actually fizzled and wasn't that successful. One of the reasons for this can be summarized by trying to do too many things at the same time and nothing really well. That's where focus comes in. It's extremely important, once you know your users' goals and needs, that you focus on solving those goals and needs really, really well, and not just spread yourself too thin over too many things. So Google actually now has an extremely successful product that fits this bill, which is the Chromecast. If you've never used the Chromecast, it's a device that you plug into your TV, and then you can basically immediately cast any content that you have on your phone to your TV. There's a few assumptions here. The first one is that everyone has a mobile phone that is Wi-Fi connected when you're at home, and Google Chromecast is also Wi-Fi connected. The other one is that everyone has access to as much content as they can dream of directly on the phone. So if you can watch all of your TV shows on your phone, and you can watch all of YouTube videos on your phone, and you have all of the content you can ever dream of, you're basically holding the most powerful remote control in the world directly in your hands. Now the only challenge is how to get that content onto your TV. That's exactly what Chromecast is solving in a very elegant way. You can plug it directly into your TV, and it disappears from your site because it hangs behind the TV. And it really allows you to just directly cast any content from your phone or your laptop onto your TV at the click of a single button. This is an amazingly focused and simple product. If you've ever bought one and went through the sign-up process, then you will see that it's a delightful product experience that's targeted towards the need and solves the essential needs there. Next is the dimension of intuitive product design. This is an interesting aspect because it varies across different users. This is something that you really have to test well with your target audience through either observations or interviews. The basic idea is that products should be easy to adopt and seamlessly integrate with the user's life and their daily activities. Intuition is not that obvious because different people may find different things more intuitive. That's why it's extremely important to know who you're selling to, who your audience is, and to test whether things that you as a product designer think are intuitive actually translate well to your users. The third dimension is robustness and reliability. This becomes extremely important, especially when you have products that are meant to be reused and that users should come back to. If your users have to repeatedly come back to your product, it's extremely important for it to be robust and reliable. Another area where robustness and reliability becomes an essential product feature is in the enterprise space, where companies rely on your product to do business. Google Search is actually an interesting example of this, because I'm sure maybe you've realized it yourself, but a lot of people use Google Search basically as a test whether their internet is working. And if you think about it, that assumes that the Google Search website is more reliable than your internet provider and certainly more reliable than other websites. So you can be sure that if you can reach google.com, the internet is working and you're always relying for google.com to be there. So that's really the goal of reliability that everyone should have, and it's not easy to achieve. You really need to be there for your users when they need you. and maybe even more important aspects of robustness and reliability is actual accessibility. Not every user has the same accessibility requirements or speaks the same languages. So again, it's extremely important that if you're addressing a very broad audience, you have to think about how to make your product accessible to the diverse audience in terms of language, in terms of different screen sizes, and in different ways that impaired users consume your content. Another aspect to take into account when thinking about a solution is how fast users can actually get value from your product. This is most important in the initial sign-up process and initial experience that users have with your product, because the funnel is usually relatively steep. So let's say you have a product that is an app that you can download in an app store. Usually, once you get people searching for your app, there's only a fraction of users who actually install it, and then there's a fraction of users who actually open the app, that go through the sign-up flow, and then go through the steps that are actually necessary to get value from your product. You want to reduce that funnel to as few steps as possible so that users can immediately get value by interacting with your product and not have to go through a long process of doing so. And this is also depicted here with this graph. Usually, when you think of sign-up flows, shorter is better. You don't want to have a complicated flow that takes on the order of minutes that users have to go through before actually using your product. Instead, you want to immediately give users benefit when they want to start using your product. Finally, if you've taken all of these aspects into account and you figure out who your users are, what their needs are, and what solution is addressing those needs, you have to think of how concise your value proposition is. I'm going to make that point a couple of times later, but one very easy way to demonstrate this is the way that Steve Jobs presented the first iPod. Here you see two very different ways of describing the iPod. On the left side, you see a very concise value proposition. It's 1,000 songs in your pocket. That implies a lot about the product. It implies its storage capacity by pointing out how many songs you can store. And it implies the size and weight of the device by saying that you can carry it in your pocket. But it's a very compelling and concise way of communicating the value. On the right side, you see a more traditional or technical way of describing it. You can say, oh well, it's small, here's the dimensions, it's very light, it has certain storage capacity and battery life, and how it connects to other devices. Now, you can infer how many songs you can store and that you can put this device in your pocket by all of these aspects. But it's not obvious, and different users will react differently to this statement. In just a moment, I will tell you why this is extremely important and why you have to think about this in a way of who you're selling your product to. This may be obvious, but if you pay close attention, you will see how many products, especially in the technology space, are marketed through technical specifications rather than user-focused value propositions.